Okay, you know you're in for a wild ride when a story starts with tequila and smashed lipstick, right? So, it was one of those girls' night out deals. Me, Sarah, my partner in crime since middle school, a whole lot of margaritas, and a club packed so tight you could barely breathe. Typical Thursday, am I right? Meanwhile, Mike, Mr. Perfect Husband, was supposedly meeting up with his buddy Rick. Honestly, when he said boys' night, I rolled my eyes but didn't think much of it. Guys need to blow off steam too, whatever. I stumbled home way past midnight, a buzz still humming through my brain. The house was pitch black, and for a second, I felt a twinge of guilt. Mike's always the responsible one, tucked into bed by 10. I probably sounded like a herd of elephants. Shrugging it off, I crashed into bed, images of the dance floor swirling in my head. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a weird sense of unease. Mike was in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing was out of the ordinary. The sight of him, all calm and normal, should have been comforting, but that unease lingered. You okay? He asked, giving me one of his half smiles. I nodded, then something flickered in my memory. Had there been a smudge of red on his collar last night? A lipstick stain? I tried to play it cool, but the image was stuck in my head. He wouldn't. Would he? Work was a blur. I kept replaying that image, trying to convince myself it was tequila-fueled paranoia. Still, at lunch, I hit up Sarah. You know how best friends have that weird mind link thing? Turns out, she'd been at the same crappy bar we were at, and yeah, she saw Rick, with some blonde bombshell hanging all over him. My stomach flipped. That's when it hit me, a bolt of pure rage shooting through me. I don't know how I stayed calm enough to say, family emergency, to my boss, but next thing I knew I was barreling home. I stormed right into Mike's home office, his supposed sanctuary where I was never allowed to disturb his genius. He wasn't there, but something else was. A pile of clothes on the floor, and beside it, my favorite red lipstick, crushed into a million pieces. It was like a scene in a bad movie. Suddenly, every stupid little thing, every late night he spent working, every time he'd brushed off my questions, clicked into place. I wasn't just imagining things. This whole time, the bastard. My scream echoed through the suddenly too quiet house. Mike. I shrieked again, fury boiling over. No answer. Of course not, the coward. I was shaking, equal parts rage and a fear I couldn't name. My hands found my phone before I even consciously thought about it. First, Mike's mom, then his dad. They were surprised to hear from me. Their voices a weird mix of clueless and concerned. Did something happen? Is Mike okay? I wanted to scream. Ask your precious son. But held back. Barely. Next, I dialed Rick's wife. Now, that woman and I have never been what you'd call friendly. Even so, hearing her panicked voice made me realize we were in the same sinking boat. She sounded just as lost as I was, maybe even more terrified. Rick hadn't come home either. Okay, so the cheaters were missing. But where the hell were they? And was that blonde bombshell with them? My mind spun out of control, conjuring up images of them laughing at us, clinking champagne glasses on some tropical beach. No way was I letting them get away with this. Suddenly, it hit me, Dan, Mike's younger brother. We weren't exactly besties, Dan and I, more like polite strangers at family gatherings. But desperate times call for desperate measures. When he answered, he sounded groggy and confused. Hey, is Mike there? I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. No, why? He left early this morning. With Rick. Said something about a fishing trip. Dan mumbled. Fishing trip, my ass. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. That lying piece of, okay. I won't repeat what I thought, but you get the picture. Those two weren't catching salmon, they were running from the mess they made. I hung up on Dan without another word. I was already halfway to my car, keys jangling in my hand. Red lights, more like suggestions as I floored the gas pedal. Every mile I drove towards Dan's shabby little house, the fury inside me grew. How dare they do this to me, to us? Pulling up in a cloud of dust, I saw Dan on his porch, pacing back and forth. He looked almost as freaked out as I felt. The moment I got out of my car, the words came tumbling out. Where is he, Dan? Don't play dumb. Where did they go? My voice was a low growl now, the rage vibrating in every word. Wait, what? I felt like someone had slapped me. Fishing trip, my ass. Dan's words hung in the air. Cash, duffel bags. My mind scrambled to make sense of them. What do you mean, more than fishing? Dan shifted uncomfortably. Listen, I don't know the whole story, but the past few weeks, Mike's been over here a lot. Late nights, talking low, always on edge. And this morning, when he showed up, there was this. He trailed off, seeming to search for the right word. Intensity about him. Intensity? I was about to blow my top. Tell me what you saw, Dan. Everything. He hesitated, then spilled it. There was a pile of cash on the kitchen table. Thousands. Way more than you'd take fishing. And those duffel bags, they weren't packed with rods and bait. It felt wrong. Wrong was an understatement. A sickening realization started to dawn. This wasn't about some affair. This was something way bigger, way scarier. Images of those movies where someone gets mixed up with the wrong people flashed through my head. Mike, my sweet, nerdy Mike? How was this even possible? Then, a wave of pure panic washed over me. Whatever Mike was tangled up in, it sounded dangerous. My fingers fumbled with my phone, desperately dialing Sarah. I needed her, the only person right now who might be able to get my head on straight. She answered on the first ring, the background noise of traffic telling me she was probably still out and about. I poured out what Dan had just told me, my voice shaking. She didn't interrupt, just let me spew out the crazy story in a jumbled mess. After a minute of stunned silence, Sarah's voice came through, sharp and focused. Hold on, let me think, I swear. I could hear the clicking of her keyboard from miles away. That girl loves her online detective work a little too much. Okay, got something, she said after what felt like forever. Mike's online activity, it's weird. Late night sessions, random gambling sites, stuff that doesn't fit his profile at all. Looks like he's been racking up serious losses. Losses. Cash. Everything was starting to click into a terrifying picture. Suddenly, the late nights and the weird tension made horrifying sense. Mike wasn't working overtime. He was desperately trying to dig himself out of a financial hole. Had it gotten so deep he was about to do something drastic? Then, Sarah dropped another bombshell. Rick's in the same boat. Got fired a few weeks ago. Turns out he was blowing company money on even worse gambling sites than Mike. His wife was about to walk out. Two losers, both on the brink, disappearing together. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Just then, Dan, who'd been mostly silent, chimed in with a voice barely above a whisper. Mike, he's been talking crazy. Saying stuff like, one big score and all his problems would be gone. Saying, they'd never have to worry about money again. The three of us were huddled on Dan's porch, the whole thing feeling completely surreal. A family crisis meeting triggered by broken hearts, bad bets, and a whole lot of bad decisions. We pieced together the fragments, each memory slotting into a disturbingly clear picture. Mike's hushed conversations with Dan, the desperation in his eyes that I'd mistaken for exhaustion, it all seemed so obvious now. You didn't think this was suspicious at the time? I snapped at Dan, a surge of anger momentarily masking my fear. He looked sheepish, mumbling something about not wanting to pry. Listen, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Sarah chimed in over the speakerphone, ever the voice of reason. We need to focus on what we know right now. Mike and Rick are in trouble. Big trouble? The words hung heavy in the air. Panic and a cold fury warred within me. The cops. Was that the right move? What if this really was some stupid scheme gone wrong, and I just dragged the authorities into our personal mess? But then, the image of that smashed lipstick flashed, a reminder of the betrayal, the lies that started this whole avalanche. My gut twisted, call it intuition, call it desperation, but something deep down told me Mike had crossed a line, way past cheating. There was no more innocent until proven guilty, for him. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. Explaining it all was a nightmare. I stumbled over the words, gambling debts, strange cash, disappearing husbands. The dispatcher sounded doubtful, like I was describing a plot from a bad soap opera, not my reality. But the cops showed up surprisingly fast, blue lights flashing in the fading daylight. Two officers, a man with a skeptical frown and a younger woman with a no-nonsense air about her. They listened, took notes, asked probing questions. Dan chimed in, awkward and hesitant. Sarah even did a long-distance statement over my crackly phone, her voice sharp with urgency. The more we talked, the more serious the officers seemed to get. The initial doubt faded, replaced by a cautious concern. The woman officer, Officer Ramirez, her badge said, looked me straight in the eye. We'll get into this, she said firmly. Missing persons, suspicious activity, it warrants an investigation. Might be longer than you expect, but we take stuff like this seriously. Seriously was the key word. Somehow, it wasn't just about cheating anymore. The police were sniffing out something bigger, something potentially criminal. A small part of me hoped they were wrong, that Mike would get fished out of some lake, sheepish and hungover from a dumb boy's trip. But the realist in me, the part fueled by rage and fear, knew that hope was a dangerous gamble right now. After the cops left, an unsettling silence fell over the porch. Dan hovered awkwardly, looking like he wanted to disappear into thin air. Sarah's voice crackled through my phone's speaker, a lifeline in this suddenly bleak reality. But even her usual pep talk sounded hollow. We were stranded, a band of misfits thrown together by the whirlwind of Mike and Rick's idiotic decisions. The following days morphed into a waking nightmare. Each ring of my phone was like an electric shock, but never the one I prayed for. Instead, there were tense updates from Officer Ramirez filled with more questions than answers, bill collectors demanding payments I couldn't make, and pitiful calls from Mike's mom with her trembling voice. A voice that made me want to both hug her and scream at her for raising such a fool. My life imploded. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, replaced by endless nights staring at the ceiling. Even during the day, I couldn't seem to eat solid food, my stomach twisting with a mix of dread and nausea. I tried working, seeking the familiar comfort of numbers, but every spreadsheet started to look like a tally of Mike's debts, a constant reminder of how badly he messed up. One night, fueled by insomnia and a sick need for answers, I scrolled through old photos. We looked so happy then, Mike and me, grinning back at the camera during our honeymoon in the Bahamas. I zoomed in on one picture, studying it with a strange intensity. Something was off, a nagging detail at the edge of my vision. Wait, wasn't that Rick? Half hidden in the background, chatting with some random guy on the beach. A cold nod formed in my stomach. How long had this been going on? This wasn't just a recent lapse in judgment, this was something deeper. Had Mike and Rick been scheming even back then? Sarah. I fumbled for my phone, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Sarah, wake up, I need you. She grumbled something about crazy conspiracies, but I ignored her. Her blurry-eyed image appeared on the screen after a few agonizing seconds. I shoved the honeymoon photo at the camera, practically shouting, "Look, is that Rick? Do you remember seeing him there?" Sarah, bless her, snapped into focus. Her eyes scanned the photo then widened. "Oh crap," she whispered. "Now that you mention it." Fueled by a volatile mix of caffeine and fury, Sarah and I became internet bloodhounds. We scrolled through years of photos, cross-referencing them with social media posts. The truth was undeniable. Mike and Rick had been lurking in the background of each other's lives way longer than I'd realized. There they were, grinning awkwardly at a college party, caught in the corner of a blurry selfie at some beach bar. Had this been their master plan all along? The doorbell jolted me out of my frenzy. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of hope and dread knotting my stomach. It wasn't the cops, it was someone I'd never expected to see on my doorstep. "Hi," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm Lisa, Rick's wife." It was the most surreal moment of my life. There we stood, two women devastated by the same two idiots, forced to play this twisted game of connect the dots. I think I offered tea or something equally useless, and we sat down on the couch, facing each other like awkward strangers. It turned into a support group meeting we never asked for. I poured out my story, the lipstick, the lies, everything. Lisa, her features tight with a barely concealed rage, mirrored my tale. Rick had been sinking their finances into the same black hole of online gambling. Apparently, her threat to leave wasn't an empty one. She packed her bags that very same morning the guys disappeared. And that's when the picture became horribly clear. Two desperate men, drowning in debt, vanishing with a suspicious amount of cash. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. This wasn't about running off with blondes. This was something far more dangerous. Had they cooked up some idiotic scheme for a quick buck and gotten themselves in way over their heads? Lisa stood up abruptly, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. "I'm staying with my sister," she said, voice trembling slightly. "It's safer this way." Just as she was about to walk out, she turned and her words chilled me to bone. "Honestly, it's probably better they disappeared together. After what he's done, I don't know what I'd do if I found Rick." The look in her eyes, a mix of fear and fury, mirrored my own. That night, my dreams were a dark twist on reality. I saw Mike and Rick, not on some tropical beach, but bound and gagged in a dank basement, or worse, at the bottom of the river. Suddenly, Mike wasn't a villain anymore. He was the victim too. The next morning, renewed terror propelled me to action. I dialed Officer Ramirez again, a desperate, pleading edge to my voice. The usual, "We're working on it," didn't cut it anymore. I needed results, needed them to find Mike before whoever he was mixed up with did. Sarah, her voice crisp over the phone, snapped me back into focus. "Okay, we need a plan. Those cops aren't moving fast enough, so it's up to us." Suddenly, the fear and helplessness morphed into a kind of twisted determination. We were an unlikely detective duo, but right now, Mike's safety and bringing him to justice rested on our shoulders. Driving to that seedy-looking bar, my heart thudded against my ribs. With Sarah hunched over her laptop in the passenger seat, navigating a world of shady forums and back-alley gambling sites, it felt like a scene out of a bad crime thriller. Except, this was my life now. A world of dive bars, desperation, and a relentless search for answers. The bar itself was all neon signs and despair. Inside, stale beer and cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. A soundtrack of clanging slot machines and weary laughter formed the background score to this tragedy. We scanned the room, searching for any sign of Mike or Rick. Then, something made my stomach drop. There, tucked away in a dimly lit corner, sat a figure hunched over a poker table. It couldn't be, but it was. Dan, Mike's brother, the quiet one I never really knew. Seeing him here hit me harder than any revelation about Mike. A flurry of conflicting emotions swirled within me. Fury at the possibility of his involvement, confusion about how he fit into this mess, and a strange, stinging sense of betrayal. "Wait," Sarah whispered, grabbing my arm. "Don't assume the worst. Maybe he's in the same boat as us, looking for Mike too." And suddenly, just like that, he spotted us. The color drained from his face, and he fumbled towards us, knocking over his beer in his haste. His story spilled out in panicked bursts. Dan wasn't a crook. He was another victim. Mike had played him, sweet-talking him into investing in some sure thing a few weeks back. Dan, trusting his brother implicitly, had sunk his entire life savings into it, money meant for the down payment on his dream house. The revelation landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just gambling addiction, it was deliberate manipulation. Mike had used his own brother, exploiting his trust to fuel this insane scheme. A sickening feeling washed over me. This tangled web of deceit went deeper than cheating or even criminal activity. It was a betrayal of family, of trust, of something fundamentally decent. Leaving the bar, the three of us stood under the flickering streetlight, a pathetic image of those screwed over by the same person. Dan sobbed, shoulders hunched in defeat. He was broken, financially destroyed and crushed under the weight of his brother's actions. An odd wave of pity washed over me. As angry as I was at Mike, seeing Dan like this twisted something in my gut. Standing there with Dan, watching his shoulders shake with sobs, something inside me shifted. It wasn't forgiveness for Mike, far from it, but maybe a warped sense of responsibility. Here we were, two people utterly screwed over by the same man, both caught in the destructive wake of his lies and schemes. "We'll get through this," I heard myself saying, the words sounding strange even to my own ears. Dan stared at me like I might have lost my mind. A flicker of something. Was it hope? In his tired eyes, "We'll work it out. Figure out a way to fix this mess." The next few days were a blur of relentless investigation. Sarah, with newfound determination, dove deep into the murky world of cryptocurrency and suspicious online transactions. I learned more about the dark side of the internet than I ever cared to. Mike and Rick, it turned out, weren't just dabbling in some small-town gambling den. They had somehow gotten themselves mixed up with high-stakes poker rings, where the amounts being wagered made my head spin. This wasn't about some desperate attempt to win back a few thousand. It felt bigger, scarier, a whole different level of dangerous. Suddenly, we weren't chasing cheating husbands. We were potentially tangling with people I didn't even want to imagine. Driven by a desperate need for action, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I called the cops again. This time, instead of platitudes, I hammered them with every bit of information we dug up. The cryptocurrency trail, the shady poker forums, everything. Officer Ramirez, usually cool and reserved, sounded different this time. There was a sharpness in her voice, a sense of urgency that mirrored my own. Then, a glimmer of hope. A potential sighting, a guy matching Mike's description at a gas station a few hours north. It was flimsy, the cops warned, but they were mobilizing. For the first time in days, the knot in my stomach loosened, just a fraction. The three of us, me, Sarah, and Dan, the world's most mismatched team of detectives, piled into my car. It was a road trip born of desperation, a mix of terror and the tiniest flicker of ridiculous hope. Had Mike snapped, trying to just run from the consequences? Was Rick with him? And even more importantly, was there a stash of cash? As we drove, my mind raced, churning up every possible scenario. I saw Mike in handcuffs in a shootout, in a broken heap on the side of the road. All of it seemed more likely than him sipping cocktails with some blonde on a tropical island. The cheating, the lipstick, that felt like a million years ago. We were in uncharted territory now, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to know what lay at the end. I remember thinking it was just another summer morning when Mike and I locked our front door, the one with the peeling paint we always said we'd fix but never did. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, waved from across the street, promising to spoil our cat, Whiskers, in our absence. "Have fun in Italy," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of envy. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting with a mix of excitement and something else I couldn't quite place. Mike didn't notice. He was too busy double-checking our flight information, his brow furrowed, the ever-responsible IT technician making sure we hadn't missed a detail. "Let's not be late," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, following him to the car, the weight of my suitcase mirroring the heaviness in my heart. The drive to the airport was silent, the kind of quiet that's loud with things unsaid. I tried to fill it with talk about the places we'd see, the food we'd eat, but my words felt hollow. Mike just nodded, his fingers tapping away on his phone, responding to work emails, or so I assumed. That's when the first crack appeared, a small, nagging feeling that something between us had shifted, grown colder, like the last days of autumn before winter takes hold. Landing in Rome was supposed to be the moment everything changed. The ancient city, with its ruins and mysteries, was meant to reignite the spark between us, to remind us of the love that had once seemed unshakable. Instead, as we wandered through the Colosseum, I found myself laughing not at Mike's jokes but at Alex's, a charming stranger from Australia with a smile that reached his eyes and a laugh that filled the empty spaces inside me. Our meeting felt like fate, a chance encounter at a cafe the next day sealing the deal. Alex was everything Mike wasn't anymore. Attentive, exciting, alive. We talked for hours, our conversation flowing as easily as the Tiber River, and when we parted, my phone had a new number saved, labeled, just in case. Just in case came sooner than I expected. The lie slipped out easily, almost too easily. "I'm going on a solo tour today," I told Mike, avoiding his gaze. "Just need some me time, you know?" He didn't question it, just nodded, lost in his own world. Mine, however, was about to collide with Alex's in a way I hadn't anticipated. Tuscany was a dream, its rolling hills and sprawling vineyards the perfect backdrop for what I told myself was a harmless adventure. Alex's hand found mine as we wandered, and I didn't pull away. The thrill of the forbidden pulsed through me, a stark contrast to the guilt that gnawed at its edges. But in that moment, under the Tuscan sun, with Alex's lips on mine, I convinced myself that what happens in Italy stays in Italy. It was a lie, of course, one of many. But as the day turned to evening and I returned to Mike, the lie felt like a truth I wanted to live, even if just for a little while longer. The Tuscan sun was a silent witness to the moment my life veered off its predictable path. There, among the endless rows of vineyards, my lips met Alex's in a kiss that was anything but innocent. It was the kind of kiss that spoke of yearnings kept silent, of desires unfulfilled until now. The guilt? It was there, a shadow at the edge of my mind, but drowned out by the rush of excitement coursing through me. This wasn't the Sarah who meticulously planned her lessons or who spent her weekends grading papers. This Sarah was someone else entirely, someone capable of passion, of recklessness, of betrayal. Returning to Mike, the guilt tried to assert itself, whispering accusations in my ear. But the thrill of my secret silenced it every time. Each kiss, each stolen moment with Alex, was a spark in the monotony of my daily existence. And I clung to it, the excitement of the affair becoming my new normal. It became a game of deception, of living a double life. To Mike, I was exploring Italy's rich tapestry of art and culture, losing myself in galleries and cooking classes. But in truth, I was losing myself in Alex. The lies flowed easier than I'd ever imagined, each one building on the last, creating a facade of a wife consumed by the beauty of Italy, not by the touch of another man. But lies, no matter how well crafted, leave traces. Mike's growing suspicion was evident in his eyes, the way they lingered a moment too long, searching mine for the truth. "You're really loving these art galleries, huh?" he'd ask, a hint of something unspoken in his voice. "Absolutely," I'd respond, weaving tales of Italy's charm and my newfound passion for art, all while my heart raced with the fear of being discovered. The day the receipt from that restaurant in Florence found its way into Mike's hands was the day I thought my house of cards would come tumbling down. "This is for two," he'd said, holding the evidence of my betrayal, his voice laced with a confusion that bordered on suspicion. Panic rose within me, a tide threatening to engulf us both. But I laughed it off, dismissing it as a group outing, a mere trifle. And he wanted to believe me, so he did. The relief I felt was palpable, a reprieve granted by his love, his trust, his denial. Emboldened by his acceptance, my affair with Alex intensified. We were reckless, consumed by a passion that knew no bounds. Days spent exploring Italy's hidden gems, nights entangled in each other's arms, each moment a stark contrast to the life I shared with Mike. It was as if I was leading two lives, each unaware of the other, each existing in its own bubble of reality. But bubbles burst, and lies, no matter how carefully told, begin to unravel. Each day spent with Alex was a day stolen from Mike, from us. And deep down, beneath the excitement and the thrill, I knew I was walking a tightrope, one that led to an inevitable fall. The sun hadn't even set on what was supposed to be just another enchanted evening in Rome when my world started to crumble. There I was, in our rented apartment, my heart racing, a glass of Chianti forgotten on the table. Mike and I had spent the day apart, me exploring the cobbled streets with Alex, under the guise of another solo adventure. But the thrill of the forbidden that had fueled me was quickly evaporating, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread I couldn't shake off. It all came crashing down when I carelessly left my phone on the bed, unlocked, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. I was in the shower when Mike found it, the steamy air a stark contrast to the cold silence that greeted me as I stepped out. There he was, phone in hand, his face a mask of hurt and disbelief. "Who's Alex?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through me sharper than any scream could. The message on the screen was all the evidence he needed, a string of heart emojis and plans for our next rendezvous, signed with a "can't wait to see you again, love." The room spun around me as I tried to muster an explanation, an apology, anything. But the words got stuck in my throat, guilt cementing them firmly in place. "I can explain," I finally managed, but the look in Mike's eyes told me it was too late. The trust we'd built over years, shattered in an instant by my recklessness. He didn't wait for my excuses. With a shake of his head, he left the room, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my bones. I called after him, my voice desperate, but he was already gone, lost in the labyrinth of Rome's ancient streets. My calls went straight to voicemail, each message a plea for forgiveness, a promise to make things right. But deep down, I knew some mistakes were too big to be mended by apologies, no matter how sincere. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving. Our room, once a haven of intimacy, now felt as cold and distant as the space between us. I replayed every moment, every decision that led us here, the weight of my betrayal heavier with each passing second. How had I let this happen? How had I been so careless, so selfish? The reality of what I'd done, of the pain I'd caused the man I loved, hit me then harder than it ever had. This wasn't just a fling, a holiday romance to be forgotten with the end of our trip. This was the unraveling of our life together, a life I had taken for granted until it was slipping through my fingers. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I was still awake, my heart aching with regret. The adventure I had sought out in Rome's winding streets had led me here, to this moment of profound loss. And as the new day began, I was left to wonder if the pieces of our broken story could ever be put back together, or if this was the end of the road for us, a love story turned tragedy amidst the ruins of what used to be. The morning Mike walked back through the door of our Rome hotel room, his eyes weary from a night spent wandering the city alone, was the moment I thought we might have a chance. "We need to talk," he said, his voice void of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to over the years. My heart skipped a beat, not in excitement but in fear. This was the talk that could end us, or by some miracle, begin the process of mending what I had broken. The flight back home was a silent movie, each of us lost in our own worlds of hurt and reflection, a stark contrast to the laughter-filled journey we had embarked on weeks before. The miles stretched between us, not just in the physical space on the plane, but in the emotional chasm that had formed. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap with words of apology, of explanation, but the words died in my throat, suffocated by the reality of my actions. Back home, the familiar surroundings of our life together felt alien, as if I were walking through a set of a play where I no longer knew my lines. We tried, in those first few days, to find our way back to some semblance of normalcy. Mike would ask about my day, and I would inquire about his, but our conversations were ghosts of our former communication, echoing in the emptiness of what was left unsaid. The distance between us grew, an invisible wall that no amount of forced small talk could dismantle. I missed him, missed us, more than I had imagined possible. But the harder I tried to reach out, to reconnect, the more he withdrew, his hurt a fortress I couldn't breach. Then came the day I found the business card of a divorce lawyer tucked away in his jacket pocket. The reality of our situation, stark and undeniable, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a rough patch or a temporary setback. This was the end of the road for us. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur of signatures and documents, each one erasing a part of the life we had built together. Sitting across from Mike in the sterile office of the divorce lawyer, I wanted to scream, to argue, to plead for another chance. But the look in his eyes, one of resolute finality, silenced me. This was the consequence of my actions, a price paid in the currency of a broken heart and a shattered marriage. As I signed the last of the papers, the finality of it all weighed heavily on me. The man I had married, loved, and betrayed was now a stranger, connected to me only by the memories of a life that once was. The process was clinical, devoid of the love, anger, or passion that had once defined us. We were just two people, undoing the ties that had bound us, each signature erasing a bit more of what we had shared. Walking out of the lawyer's office, the reality of my new life without Mike loomed large. The journey that had started with a forbidden kiss in the Tuscan sun had ended here, in the cold, impersonal confines of a legal office. The weight of my choices, of the betrayal that had led us here, was a burden I would carry long after the ink on the divorce papers had dried. The morning we started dividing our lives into two piles of yours and mine felt like dissecting a shared dream with a scalpel, precise, cold, and unforgiving. Each item we picked up, from the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected over the years to the photos from vacations now tainted by my betrayal, was a stark reminder of the life we were dismantling, piece by piece. "I'll take the couch," Mike said, his voice devoid of any emotion, as if discussing the weather. "You keep the dining table." The casualness of it, the normalcy he projected in dividing our shared history, was more painful than I'd anticipated. The day I moved out was one of the longest of my life. My new apartment, a stark, impersonal space in the city, felt like a tangible manifestation of my choices, empty and echoing with the consequences of my actions. As I unpacked, I couldn't help but think of Mike, alone in our now half-empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. The fallout from our divorce spread through our circle of friends and family like ripples in a pond, each wave bringing with it a mix of shock, disappointment, and in some cases, support. The story of Sarah, the high school teacher who threw away her marriage for a fleeting affair, became a cautionary tale whispered in the corners of gatherings I no longer attended. Mike, in his quiet way, had his own version of revenge. Without a word to me, he sent a detailed account of the affair to Alex's partner back in Australia. The backlash was immediate and intense. Alex confronted me, anger and betrayal marking his features. "Did you think this wouldn't get back to me?" he demanded over the phone, the hurt in his voice a mirror to the one I'd seen in Mike's eyes. Our affair, once a secret shared in the shadows of our vacation, was now out in the open, its repercussions reaching farther than I could have imagined. The whispers followed me to work, where rumors of the affair had somehow found their way into the halls of the school where I taught. My professional reputation, once built on respect and dedication, was now tarnished by the personal choices I'd made. Colleagues who once greeted me with warm smiles now offered nothing but cold shoulders, their judgment clear in their avoidance. Mike, for his part, became a shadow of the man I'd married. He withdrew into himself, his trust in relationships, in love, shattered by my actions. He threw himself into his work, using it as a shield against the pain, becoming more of a recluse with each passing day. His silence was a constant reminder of the depth of hurt I'd caused, a wound that no amount of time seemed capable of healing. In the solitude of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes of a life half-lived, the full weight of my choices settled around me. The excitement of the affair had long since faded, leaving in its wake a trail of destruction that spanned continents and libs. I was left to navigate the aftermath alone, the echoes of my decisions a constant companion in the empty spaces of my new reality. The silence in my new apartment was deafening, a constant reminder of the isolation my choices had led me to. Friends who once filled my days with laughter and plans now kept their distance, their silence a loud judgment of the indiscretion I couldn't undo. It's funny, in a tragic sort of way, how quickly people can erase you from their lives, as if they're afraid infidelity is contagious. One evening, lost in thought and the quiet hum of the city outside my window, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. But even alone, with nothing but my thoughts for company, I couldn't bring myself to fully face the reality of my actions. It was easier to blame the circumstances, the distance that had crept into my marriage, anything but the choices I had willingly made. The universe has a cruel sense of humor, it seems. At a mutual friend's party, a gathering I had almost convinced myself not to attend, I bumped into Mike. The air around us charged with attention, so thick it felt like wading through molasses. Our conversation, if you could even call it that, was a series of awkward exchanges, the chasm between us wider than ever. In a quiet corner, away from the curious eyes of those who knew snippets of our story, we spoke for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm moving," Mike said, his voice devoid of any warmth it once held for me. "I can't be here, not anymore." His words were a final nail in the coffin of whatever hope I might have harbored for a reconciliation, his goodbye as cold and detached as his stare. The fallout wasn't just personal. At work, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore, culminating in a formal reprimand for conduct unbecoming of my position. Standing in front of the school board, receiving a lecture on morality, felt like a surreal addition to the nightmare my life had become. My career, once a source of pride and accomplishment, now felt like yet another casualty of my actions. In the wake of everything, I tried to find a way forward, a path back to some semblance of the person I used to be. I joined community groups, threw myself into volunteer work, anything to fill the void left by the implosion of my marriage. Each day was a struggle, a fight to rebuild from the rubble, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or so I kept telling myself. Yet, with each new step, I couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift, of having lost a crucial part of myself along the way. My attempts at rebuilding were not just about finding a new routine or filling my days with distractions. They were a desperate search for redemption, for a way to live with the choices I had made. The path ahead was unclear, marked by the shadows of past mistakes, but it was a path I had to take, one painstaking step at a time. In the quiet of my apartment, the realization hit me like a wave, relentless and unforgiving. It wasn't just Mike I'd lost. It was my dignity, the respect of those around me, and a part of myself I feared I'd never get back. The gravity of what I'd done, the sheer weight of my betrayal, settled around me, a tangible presence in the room. For so long, I'd been caught in the whirlwind of my actions, but now, faced with the silence of my choices, the full extent of my loss was undeniable. With nowhere else to turn, I sought refuge in therapy, a desperate bid to untangle the web of emotions and decisions that had led me here. Each session was a journey into the depths of my own psyche, confronting truths I'd long avoided. It was daunting, this path to self-improvement, littered with the debris of my past choices. Yet, with each revelation, each tearful admission, I began to understand the why behind the what, the underlying currents that had swept me so far off course. Meanwhile, Mike had embarked on a new chapter of his own, miles and worlds away from the life we once shared. In a new city, with a new job, he sought to rebuild, to find solace in a fresh start. His past, our past, was a closed book, one he no longer wished to open. The change of scenery, the new faces and places, offered him a semblance of peace, a chance to heal without the constant reminders of what had been. Yet, for all our attempts to move forward, the memory of the affair lingered, a shadow that trailed behind us. It was there in the quiet moments, in the spaces between new experiences and encounters, a ghost from a life we'd both tried to leave behind. The thrill of the affair, once so intoxicating, now seemed a paltry thing compared to the wreckage it had left in its wake. In a moment of clarity, fueled by months of therapy and introspection, I penned a letter to Mike, an apology not meant to bridge the gap between us, but to acknowledge the hurt I had caused. It was an attempt at redemption, however futile, a need to express my regret, to say the words that had gone unspoken. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor did I deserve it, but I needed him to know that I understood the depth of my wrongdoing. Mike's response, or lack thereof, was a silence that spoke volumes. The letter remained unanswered, a testament to the depth of his hurt, a hurt I had inflicted. His silence was the final piece of our story, a story that had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, lingering sorrow. And so, we continued on our separate paths, the scars of our past a permanent reminder of the history we shared and the pain it had wrought. Our story, once filled with love and hope, had ended in a way neither of us could have imagined. The lessons learned were hard-won, the cost of our actions higher than either of us had anticipated. In the end, it was a tale of loss, of love gone awry, and the long, difficult journey towards redemption. My world shattered when Sarah confessed her affair. I never saw it coming. We'd been married for 8 years, and to say I was blindsided would be an understatement. I remember the evening she dropped the bombshell. We were sitting in our living room, sipping on glasses of red wine. The TV was on, but I couldn't tell you what show was playing. The atmosphere was tense. I could feel it in the air. "Mark, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She put her wine glass down and took a deep breath. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart racing. My mind raced through various scenarios, but infidelity wasn't one of them. "I've been seeing someone else," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "And there's something else I need to tell you." My stomach churned as I tried to process her words. Seeing someone else? That alone was devastating. But what could be worse than that? She continued, I've been thinking, Mark, about the idea of an open marriage. I want to explore my feelings for this other person. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. An open marriage? It was as if she just handed me a grenade and expected me not to pull the pin. The very thought of it was absurd, and my first instinct was to refuse. But then something unexpected happened. Maybe it was the shock or the desperation to salvage our relationship. I hesitated for a moment, and then the words came out of my mouth. I'll agree to an open marriage, Sarah, but on one condition. She looked at me, puzzled and cautious. What condition? You have to let me have an affair too. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She hadn't expected that response. I saw a mix of shock and confusion on her face. In that moment, it was as if we'd entered uncharted territory, and we were both unsure of the path ahead. After a tense silence, Sarah finally nodded reluctantly, thinking that I'd never go through with it. She assumed it was just a desperate attempt to hold on to her. Little did she know that I was dead serious. I had a plan, and it involved introducing her to someone who would turn her world upside down, just like she'd done to mine. I couldn't allow her to walk away unscathed after what she'd put me through. So, I decided to introduce Sarah to Emily, a woman I'd met through a friend. Emily was attractive, intelligent, and, most importantly, willing to play her part in my twisted game. As Sarah hesitantly embarked on her affair with a man she met online, named David, I watched from the shadows, plotting my revenge. I knew this was the beginning of a dangerous game, one that would test the limits of our marriage and the depths of our emotions. Little did Sarah know that her life was about to take a tumultuous turn, and she would soon experience the same pain and betrayal she'd inflicted upon me. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's affair with David deepened. It was like a dark cloud looming over our marriage, casting a shadow we couldn't escape. The lies and cover-ups became increasingly elaborate, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Sarah would sneak around, texting David under the guise of work meetings or girls' nights out. Our once open and honest communication had turned into a web of deception. I felt like a detective, piecing together the fragments of her secret life. One evening, I overheard her whispering to David on the phone in the bedroom. She thought I was asleep, but every word cut deeper into my heart. I couldn't escape the reality that our marriage was unraveling before my eyes. As if the situation wasn't complicated enough, Emily entered the picture. She had initially agreed to be my affair partner, but her feelings for me were becoming more than just physical attraction. I could sense it in the way she looked at me, the way she touched my arm when we were together. It was a dangerous game, and I was starting to lose control. The tension and jealousy between the four of us were palpable. Sarah would shoot me icy glares when she saw Emily and me talking or laughing together. Emily, on the other hand, would become distant whenever she suspected Sarah and I were spending time alone. One evening, Sarah confronted me about Emily's growing presence in my life. Accusations flew, and we argued like we never had before. It was a toxic mix of anger, betrayal, and resentment. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and we both knew it. Then came the bombshell. Sarah was pregnant. She hesitantly told me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. My heart sank as I grappled with the overwhelming question. Was this child mine or David's? Suspicion gnawed at me like a relentless beast. The timing was too perfect, too suspicious. I couldn't ignore the possibility that this baby might not be mine. It was a painful realization that tore at the last remnants of trust in our marriage. Sarah's pregnancy intensified the strain between us. The questions, the doubts, and the betrayal had pushed us to the brink. Our relationship was hanging on by a thread, and we were both drowning in a sea of uncertainty. The future was uncertain, and the path ahead seemed darker than ever. David's relentless pressure on Sarah to leave me for him had become unbearable. He saw her vulnerability and exploited it, using the threat of revealing their affair as a weapon to manipulate her. I could see the toll it was taking on Sarah, and it fueled my determination to bring this twisted game to an end. One evening, after another heated argument with David, Sarah reached a breaking point. She couldn't bear the weight of his ultimatum any longer. Desperation painted her face as she finally decided to confide in someone, and that someone was her best friend, Lisa. Lisa was always there for Sarah, a pillar of strength in her life. She had a way of soothing Sarah's fears and providing a listening ear. So, when Sarah poured her heart out about the affair and the threats, she expected comfort and advice. But what Sarah didn't expect was the bombshell Lisa dropped next. In a hushed and uneasy tone, Lisa admitted, "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. I've been seeing David for months." Sarah's world crumbled. The person she trusted the most, the one she confided in, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet, leaving her in free fall. As the shock settled in, Sarah began to connect the dots. David and Lisa had been working together all along, using her as a pawn in their twisted game to gain control over my life and manipulate our marriage. It was a cruel and calculated plan that had pushed us all to the brink. With newfound clarity and a burning anger, Sarah decided to confront David and Lisa. She couldn't let them continue to hold her hostage with their threats and lies. The confrontation was inevitable, and the stakes were higher than ever. When the moment finally came, it was a whirlwind of emotions. Accusations flew, voices rose, and tempers flared. Sarah was no longer the vulnerable woman they thought they could control. She had found her strength, her voice, and she was determined to put an end to their treacherous scheme. In the heat of the argument, the threat of exposure hung in the air like a sword dangling by a thread. David and Lisa realized that their house of cards was teetering on the edge of collapse, and their desperate attempts to maintain control were slipping through their fingers. The confrontation marked a turning point in our tangled web of deceit and betrayal. The battle lines were drawn, and it was clear that no one would emerge from this unscathed. The coming days promised more twists, more turmoil, and a reckoning that none of us could have foreseen. The tension in our lives had reached a boiling point, and Sarah and I knew that it was time to take action. We had both been ensnared in David and Lisa's deceitful plan for far too long. It was time to turn the tables. With newfound determination, we decided to work together. Our common enemy was a formidable duo, but we were fueled by a burning desire for justice. We couldn't let David and Lisa continue to manipulate our lives and threaten our marriage. Our first step was to gather evidence against them. We started by documenting every interaction, every text message, and every piece of information that could expose their web of lies. It was a painstaking process, but we were meticulous in our efforts. As we dug deeper, we uncovered a tangled web of deception. David and Lisa had been orchestrating their plan for months, weaving an intricate tapestry of lies and betrayal. It was a chilling revelation that made us even more determined to expose them. Once we had gathered enough evidence, we knew it was time to confront David and Lisa. It was a nerve-wracking moment, but we couldn't let fear hold us back any longer. We demanded that they leave our lives forever, that their reign of manipulation and deceit come to an end. The confrontation was tense, to say the least. Accusations flew, tempers flared, and the air was thick with anger and resentment. David and Lisa, cornered and exposed, had no choice but to reluctantly agree to leave. But as they walked away, they vowed revenge with a chilling determination in their eyes. With their departure, there was a sense of relief, but the scars of their betrayal ran deep. Sarah and I were left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives, and our marriage bore the damage. Our relationship was strained, trust had been eroded, and the wounds were far from healed. But we were determined to rebuild. Slowly, we began the arduous process of rebuilding trust, of finding our way back to each other. It was a journey filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and insecurity. But there was a newfound resilience in our bond, a shared experience of betrayal that had forged an unbreakable connection. As we navigated the turbulent waters of our marriage, we held on to the hope that, someday, we would emerge from this stronger than ever. The aftermath of the chaos brought by David and Lisa had left me emotionally battered. I felt like a ship adrift in a stormy sea, unable to find my way back to calmer waters. Desperation led me to seek help where I could find it: therapy. I started attending therapy sessions, trying to cope with the emotional trauma caused by the affair. My therapist, Dr. Foster was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He cut straight to the heart of the matter, forcing me to confront my pain head-on. Therapy wasn't easy. It was like ripping open old wounds, but I knew it was necessary. Dr. Foster helped me dissect the emotions I'd been suppressing for far too long. The anger, the betrayal, the insecurity. It was a slow and painful process, but it was a step towards healing. During this tumultuous time, Sarah had an unexpected surprise for us. She gave birth to our child, a tiny bundle of joy in the midst of our turmoil. I knew there was a possibility that the baby might not be mine, but I made a decision. I would raise this child as my own, regardless of its true paternity. It was my way of reaffirming my commitment to our family. As we navigated the challenges of parenthood together, Sarah and I found our love deepening. The bond between us grew stronger with each passing day. We were more committed than ever to rebuilding our family and forging a brighter future. But little did we know that the shadows of our past still loomed. David and Lisa, consumed by their thirst for revenge, were secretly plotting our downfall. They couldn't stand the thought of us finding happiness again, and they were determined to destroy the newfound peace in our lives. Their plan was sinister: to expose the paternity of Sarah's child and create chaos within our family. It was a cruel and calculated move, one that threatened to tear us apart once more. As the storm clouds of revenge gathered on the horizon, Sarah and I remained blissfully unaware of the impending danger. We were too focused on our love, our family, and the future we were building together. Little did we know that the past would come back to haunt us, and the battle for our happiness was far from over. Just when we thought we were on the path to healing, a sinister storm descended upon us. An anonymous letter arrived one gloomy morning, and its contents would turn our lives upside down. The letter contained a DNA test report, and the words on it struck like a dagger to my heart. It claimed to prove that I was not the father of Sarah's child. The shock of it was overwhelming, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of despair. I confronted Sarah with the letter in trembling hands, tears blurring my vision. The trust we had been painstakingly rebuilding was shattered in an instant. I demanded a paternity test to confirm the child's true father, desperately hoping that the report was a cruel hoax. The day of the paternity test was a tortuous waiting game. The tension between Sarah and me was unbearable, and the silence was deafening. I tried to hold on to hope, but doubt gnawed at me like a relentless beast. When the results finally arrived, they were like a death sentence. The paternity test confirmed what the anonymous letter had claimed. I was not the biological father of Sarah's child. My world crumbled around me, and the pain was indescribable. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah finally confessed the truth. She admitted to her affair with David, the lies, the betrayal. It all spilled out like a torrent of guilt and regret. My heart ached as I listened to her words, but forgiveness felt like an impossible mountain to climb. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too raw. I couldn't find it in my heart to forgive Sarah for her actions and the web of deceit that had torn our marriage apart. The love we had once shared was buried beneath the weight of our mistakes. In a decision that felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship, I made the agonizing choice to leave Sarah. Our journey, which had started with hope and love, had taken us through a harrowing storm of lies and betrayal. And in the end, it was a storm that had broken us beyond repair. The fallout from the paternity test was catastrophic, and it left a trail of destruction in its wake. Sarah lost everything: her marriage, her family, and her happiness. It was as if her world had crumbled into a million pieces, and there was no way to put it back together. With the results confirming that I was not the biological father of her child, I gained custody, severing Sarah's ties to her own offspring. The pain in her eyes as she said goodbye to our child was a heart-wrenching sight. It was a harsh reminder of the choices we had made and the consequences we had to face. Sarah spiraled into a deep abyss of depression and isolation. The weight of her choices bore down on her like an unrelenting burden. The guilt and regret were suffocating, and she withdrew from the world, drowning in her own sorrow. Meanwhile, David and Lisa reveled in their revenge, but it didn't bring them the satisfaction they had expected. Their victory was hollow. Their triumph over our suffering left a bitter taste in their mouths. It was a stark reminder that vengeance often comes at a high cost. As for me and our child, we had to move on without Sarah. It was a painful process, but we were determined to rebuild our lives. The wounds were still fresh, the scars still visible, but we carried on, trying to find a semblance of normalcy in the chaos that had become our lives. The chapter ended with a profound sense of loss and sadness. Our family had been shattered, and the future felt uncertain. It was a stark reminder that the choices we make in life can have far-reaching consequences, and sometimes there's no going back. As the dust settled on the wreckage of our marriage, Sarah was left in the wake of her choices, searching for a way to redeem herself. She was desperate for forgiveness and redemption, and it led her down a path she never expected. Sarah reached out to a support group for people who had lost everything due to their mistakes. It was a place where the broken found solace and a glimmer of hope. She attended meetings, sharing her story with others who had walked a similar path of betrayal and loss. It was in this support group that Sarah met Dr. Wilson, a kind-hearted therapist who had dedicated her life to helping people confront their actions and make amends. Dr. Wilson saw the pain in Sarah's eyes, the regret that weighed heavy on her heart. She became a guiding light on Sarah's journey toward healing and forgiveness. Meanwhile, I decided to start dating again. It was a daunting prospect, but I couldn't let the past dictate my future. I met Karen, a woman who understood my history and the scars I carried. She was patient and empathetic, providing a safe space for me to rebuild my trust and love. Sarah, on the other hand, began to realize the importance of self-forgiveness. She knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could shape her future. She embarked on a journey of self-discovery, rebuilding her life independently and finding her own path to happiness. As for David and Lisa, their relationship crumbled under the weight of guilt and remorse. Their revenge had backfired, leaving them with a bitter taste in their mouths. The love they had once shared had been tainted by their actions, and the cracks in their partnership grew wider with each passing day. The chapter ended with a glimmer of Sarah was on a path of redemption, Dr. Wilson guiding her toward healing. I had found a new love in Karen, someone who understood my past. And as for David and Lisa, they were left to grapple with the consequences of their actions, learning that revenge was a bitter pill to swallow. Dr. Wilson had become a guiding presence in Sarah's life, encouraging her to focus on personal growth and self-improvement. It wasn't an easy journey, but Sarah was determined to rebuild herself from the ground up. She attended therapy sessions regularly, delving deep into the roots of her mistakes and seeking a path to redemption. Meanwhile, my life had taken a different turn. I had found love again, this time with Karen. Our relationship had blossomed, and I knew I was ready to move on from my tumultuous past. It was with a sense of hope and renewed purpose that I proposed to Karen, eager to build a future together. As for Sarah, she found a new purpose in helping others who had faced similar challenges. The support group had become her sanctuary, a place where she could connect with those seeking redemption and healing. It was a way for her to give back, to use her own experiences to guide others on their path to recovery. Sarah's support group grew, becoming a haven for individuals who had lost their way but were determined to find it again. Together, they shared their stories, their pain, and their hopes for a brighter future. It was a testament to the power of redemption and the resilience of the human spirit. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah and I crossed paths at a community event. We were both changed by our past experiences, carrying the scars of our mistakes. The encounter was filled with mixed emotions, regret, nostalgia, and a sense of closure. We had both walked different paths, but our shared history would forever bind us in a way that no one else could understand. As the chapter came to a close, it was a reminder that life was a journey filled with twists and turns, with pain and redemption. Sarah and I had faced our demons, and while our paths had diverged, we had each found our own way to heal and rebuild. The future was uncertain, but we had hope, and that was enough to keep moving forward. In an unexpected turn of events, Sarah offered me a sincere apology. Her words were filled with remorse and a genuine desire to make amends for the pain she had caused. I couldn't deny the growth I had seen in her, the journey she had embarked on toward redemption. I acknowledged her efforts, and while I appreciated her apology, I remained committed to my new life with Karen. The wounds of the past were still there, and I knew that forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. We had both changed, and our paths had diverged irreversibly. As for David and Lisa, their lives continued to unravel as they faced the consequences of their actions. The weight of their revenge had left them with a heavy burden. Guilt and remorse gnawed at their souls, and the satisfaction they had hoped for remained elusive. Sarah, on the other hand, had become a beacon of hope for others who had faced similar challenges. Her support group had grown, and she embraced her new life with a sense of purpose and meaning. She had found peace within herself, a redemption she had worked tirelessly to achieve. The story took its final turn when I and Karen decided to marry, forging a new, strong, and loving family. It was a celebration of our love, a testament to our ability to heal and find happiness even after devastating mistakes. As the final chapter came to a close, it was a reminder that forgiveness and self-improvement could lead to a brighter future, even after the darkest of times. Sarah's journey of redemption had shown us that it was possible to find hope, peace, and a second chance at happiness, no matter how deep